Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Paratalk. This week, I am again joined by the one and only Mr. Shrouded Hand. Tom, we're going to look at something a little bit weird on this episode, aren't we?
Yes, I think so. Very strange indeed.
Yeah, very, very weird. And a topic I don't think I've ever. It's ideal for you because it's kind of in your department, but it's going to be like creepy Reddit gnome stories.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've done, is we've got together some Reddit stories of creepy gnomes, and we're going to go through them and give our thoughts and opinions on them. And some of them are a bit, I'd say, they're a bit disturbing, some of them. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start the first one, and I'm going to give it a read. They're only short, so no, you're not going to be having to listen to me sort of try my best to read for too long. And we're going to kind of go with that. So let's have a look at the first one. The first one's called I Saw a Gnome, but I Don't Think I Was Supposed to See Him, which is kind of creepy as, to start with. It's a
good title.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It makes you want to read it.
Yeah.
So this chap, this person, he says, when I was still in elementary school, I think what's that, infant school over here? With the young,
like primary school, is it?
Primary school, infant school. So he says, when I was still in elementary school, me and my family used to spend all summer at my great uncle's house. Me and my family slept in the same room, except for my sister, who'd sleep on a bed in the living room, and my great uncle, who slept in his own room. So one pretty normal day, we went to the beach, we ate pizza, and went to bed around 10 p.m. And they all went to sleep. At around 4 a.m., he was suddenly woken because he hears someone throwing things around with like plastic cups and that, and containers, and food in the kitchen. He goes downstairs, right, and he says the door was open, and I was able to see a light coming from the kitchen. So when I had enough of all the noise, I got up from bed. So he's got up, and he's going to have a little creep to find out what's going on. He said at first something seemed off. I thought I was having some sort of strange dream. That's what he thought. So he gets up, he thinks he's dreaming, he can hear all this noise coming from the kitchen, and he's deciding to investigate. He said his father said, my father wasn't in bed, but I didn't care much since maybe he was just in the bathroom. So one of his family members is, not there. Great uncle, who was fairly old, had trouble sleeping at night. So he thought that when he went to the kitchen, that it would be his uncle in there getting like a glass of water. So no big deal. He calls out for his uncle, and then he says, to my surprise, the room was empty, but the light was on, and the fridge was open, and a can of Coke laying in front of it. I looked up at the shelf, that was to my right, and I saw what was making the noise. Some sort of short creature, around 30 centimetres tall. A gnome, you'd say, and it was looking right at me. Terrified because I'd seen him. I thought to myself, he's going to hurt me, so I'd better fake a faint. And so he did. So he's pretending to pass out, thinking that whatever this thing is he can see, we're just going to ignore him. This gets a bit stranger now, because he says, after a couple of seconds, I opened my eyes, and I saw that I wasn't in the kitchen or on the floor anymore. I was in a strange, colourful tunnel. I got scared again, closed my eyes one more time. After a minute, which felt like an eternity, I reopened them, and I was laying in my bed. There was a sound still coming from the kitchen, but I was so scared, I just waited for it to stop. And before sunrise, it did. It says that wasn't the only encounter I had with that dude, but I never saw it again. I only heard it, because I was and am too scared to see him again. I don't know what he was doing exactly, but I'm sure I wasn't supposed to see him. And then, of course, at the end he says, I know it sounds crazy, but feel free to ask me anything about this. Well, it's a bit weird, Tom, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of at first what it made me think of when he says he lay down and pretended to faint, and then when he woke up in a strange tunnel.
Yeah.
It kind of made me think of stories of people being abducted as children
Yes.
by fairy beings and taken to some kind of strange magical world.
Yeah.
It could be something like that.
Well, yeah, I think that when you think of like gnomes and fairies and stuff, it's a lot of folklore, a lot of things like gnomes and little people and stuff. When you've got people that are seeing stuff like that in their homes, is it paranormal? Is it not paranormal? But there is another. I mean, you pointed out that there was a comment.
Yeah. Well, just to stay on that story for a second, another possibly the most revealing thing was that they ate some pizza just before they went to bed. So in my head, I'm like, it's just the fact that he wakes up, he ate some pizza, and then he woke up in the middle of the night, and then had that experience. It does kind of make me think it's possibly a dream. And the fact that when he woke up again, he could still hear the sounds coming from the kitchen. It kind of, what I thought was he was hearing those sounds as he was sleeping. It was his uncle in the kitchen, and he in his dream he thought that he was awake and in the kitchen and seeing this gnome. I don't know. That's just what I thought reading through it. That it was possibly a dream.
Yeah, like a kind of cheesy dream.
Very possibly. I don't want to be rude to the person who wrote the story. But it's a strange childhood memory, and I just thought the fact that they ate some pizza and then went to bed and then woke up having this strange experience made me a little bit suspicious that it might just be a dream. But
if I do eat a lot of cheese before I go to sleep, I normally have wacky dreams.
Yeah.
And if you're eating quite a lot of pizza, quite a lot of cheese on a pizza, so maybe that is maybe you've got, or maybe the something on the pizza was a bit off, and it made him sort of hallucinate or something.
Yeah, it could have been. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it made me suspicious. But there is a comment underneath it that I found maybe more interesting than the original post.
Yeah.
Maybe slightly more credible.
So we've got, my dad grew up in Mexico and always tells the story about little buddies. He describes them as gnomes, like creatures that he'd seen all around the school. They'd help clean up and put things away. Him and his brother both saw them repeatedly, but no one ever believed them. It kind of goes on that it says we have them all in the front yard and the house, and I swear every time I see them, they're in a different place. So they're apparently moving around. So
I mean, that could just be his dad moving him around for fun. But I like this story because one, him and his brother both saw the same things.
Yeah,
they weren't. It wasn't like he'd woken up in the middle of the night and saw them. He'd seen them in the daytime while he was at school. And there was another witness, and into adulthood, he still believed it enough to tell his own children about it.
I suppose it's a worldwide thing in some way, but my mum was she enjoyed gardening and stuff, and I remember that she had in her garden they had like a little water area, like a waterfall, and it was covered in these little gnomes, and my dad would paint them all up. And they made like a little scene of them, and all that stuff. And I never really thought to myself that it's something that you talk about in fairy tales and stuff, and they're not real or anything. But I'm not saying that they are definitely real. But you think to yourself, if people are seeing these things, it might not be a gnome in the sense of what's in your garden, but it might be something that's manifesting in a way. That we can associate with.
Quite a lot of these stories that I've read through have these gnomes sort of helping or moving things around in the house. It reminds me of. Have you heard stories? Have you heard stories of boggarts? They're like in English. I don't know if they're like a goblin. They're more like they're almost more like a spirit, like a house spirit.
Vaguely. Yeah.
There's like a story of a boggart. I think it's like a northwest sort of legend. I remember when I lived in Manchester, there was a place like a park nearby called Boggart Hole Clough, which was supposedly haunted by the boggarts. And there's a lot of stories about these boggarts. They sound more like poltergeists, really. They're just sort of spirits that you don't really see them, but they move things around. They're sort of like tricksters. Sometimes they'll help and do the tidying or the washing up or something like that. But a lot of these gnome stories sounded quite similar to these sort of helper spirits that I've read about in various places.
Think of gnomes, you think them of they come out at night, they collect stuff, they go in your kitchen, they nick your crisps or whatever, and you hear them, but you never see them, and it's a lot of people sort of say, oh, it's the little people, it's the people that live under the stairs sort of thing, or in the garden or whatever. I mean, they are associated. If you go back in folklore, and there's different versions, because you've got the European version and you've got what I call the English version. And the English version, as you say, is exactly how you described it. They were like helpers. They were on that sort of same level as fairies, where they lived in a mystical place, and they would only come out at certain times, and the interaction between them was very rare. You do get that kind of paranormal vibe about them. You get that paranormal vibe in the sense of, if you had to catalogue them and say, well, where would they sort of be, then likelihood it would be in the realms of sort of poltergeist phenomenon, that kind of thing.
I'm quite interested in folklore because of when you read into them, there's a lot of similarities when you look into these stories to what we think of as modern paranormal phenomena, poltergeists. There's quite a lot of similarities between these stories and alien encounters as well.
Yeah, true.
There's quite a lot of, you see like a little small man, and he abducts you and takes you somewhere else. And you look into the folklore stories, these are very similar to modern abduction stories. And that's something that interests me, is the link between folklore and the paranormal.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you go back to the olden days, like the proper olden days, I mean, where before people started to talk about aliens or whatever, and people would say, oh, I went out for a walk and this little man came up to me and took me into the forest, and I was gone for a number of days, and they were dancing and all this stuff, and they gave me food or whatever. And it is a kind of a ye olde worldy kind of abduction scenario where the person is taken away, they miss time. Obviously, they measured time slightly differently back then, but it's I was gone for a whole day, or when I got back to my village, people wanted to know where I'd been, or and you explain, oh, I went to this place, and when they go back there, they can't find the place where they went, and it's kind of, it is very similar, very similar to abductions.
Yeah, well, I'm quite what's the theory called? It escapes my memory, but there's something about it. It's like where you see something and you can't really place what it is because it's so outside of your experience. Yeah. So your mind sort of slots it into something that you'll know. So, in ancient times when they were steeped in this folklore, they might see something and go, oh, it's a fairy or a goblin or something like that. And these days we'd see the same thing and go, oh, it was a ghost.
Yeah, definitely.
It's but what we might be experiencing is something
way beyond. Beyond.
Just something like that's just so beyond our ability to comprehend it that it's none of those things really. It's just something that we sort of impress our own idea of what it should be, and that's what we see because it's we just, our brains can't comprehend it, so we just sort of see something really odd and go, oh, it must be this.
Well, I actually I'm trying to rack my brains where I read it, but I did read it was a theory put forward that the paranormal and the unknown, the UFOs, all of it is all manifested all by the same thing, and the parts of it that we experience and that we believe, what for example, you see a little man or whatever, an alien or whatever, or a ghost. It's all part of the same phenomenon that creates it all, and the phenomenon is fueled by our perceptions and our fears. And when we have this experience, whatever we believe we're seeing we're seeing in a way that we are creating that experience through our own understanding of the world and our own life experience. So the phenomenon is giving us a way of understanding what we're seeing in a way that we can process it. Because if you think about it, if you experience something beyond the realms of anything of your understanding, how do you process that?
I mean, it makes me think of like things on another dimension, like if we saw something that was 4-dimensional, we wouldn't be able to understand it. We'd just be able to process it in like a 3-dimensional way.
Yeah.
So we'd see a 3-dimensional object, but it'd be 4-dimensional, and we do only process it through what our brains can understand. I feel like that's quite a good explanation for a lot of this phenomena. I mean, I don't know if it does explain it, but it's an interesting idea. That kind of why I'm interested in this folklore and paranormal at the same time. I think it's all sort of linked in some way.
So we've got another story here, and it says gnomes haunted my aunt's house. Okay.
Yeah.
And it says there were gnomes in my aunt's house in the 1990s in California. They looked like garden gnome statues, but living, moving beings. They had little outfits and pointed hats and beards. They were short little guys and didn't want to be caught, so we would often see them scurrying around the corners in the hallways and the bedrooms. He says, I saw one once run downstairs. They would also be spotted sitting on random cupboards and shelves throughout the house, pretending to be statues. We wouldn't take notice. Well, I would, but anyway, I suppose if you're used to it, it's like, oh well. We wouldn't take notice. Also, they would be spotted outside, peering over the rock formations by the pool when people would be swimming. I think they were just curious, playful beings who had fun teasing people in the house with their quick appearances. They were also fond of rearranging the dining room furniture while everyone slept. They never did anything bad or scary, just kind of playful and coexisted, I suppose. That's definitely very sort of poltergeisty, isn't it?
Poltergeist, yeah. I was going to say, especially that. I don't know why. What is it with poltergeists and dining room furniture? I hear so many stories of them rearranging the dining room. It's either the kitchen cupboards being opened or the dining room chairs being arranged in a strange way. I've heard so many stories where that happens.
It's weird, that, isn't it? I mean, you think about it. If you think of most cases, a lot of the phenomenon does happen either in the kitchen or in the front room, and it's normally, as you say, with furniture moving and things being stacked up and stuff like that. So that is a bit weird. Yeah, I never really sort of stop and think to stuff like that. I read it and think, oh, that's a bit weird. When you analyse it and you think, oh, God, yeah, that is a bit odd, really. I don't know, maybe if, as I say, maybe if we have something to do with the poltergeist phenomenon in the sense that, in a way, it's us haunting ourselves, maybe we've got this thing about furniture. If you've got these kind of little things in your home, I mean, Tom, let's be honest, you've got your house, right, and you're at home and you start seeing these little beings around your house. What's the first thing you're going to think?
I'd probably think I was going insane.
Yeah.
I'd go to the doctor and say, I'm seeing a strange thing. But this is the thing with that story. It's another one where it's not saying I saw them, it's like we saw them.
Yeah.
So there was multiple people seeing these things. What I found weird about the story, which I don't quite understand, is they'd see them scurrying down the stairs or just, out the corner of their eye, but then they'd see them sitting on the top of cupboards. Like, wouldn't they just stop and try and pick one up or speak to it or something like that? It's a bit of an odd bit of that story where they'd see gnomes sitting on the top of cupboards trying to remain still like statues so they wouldn't take notice.
There's a gnome with a fishing rod on the top of the cupboards and you just think, it's just, that's what they do. You think, what's he doing in here? He should be in the garden. Yeah,
I just wonder why they didn't like try to interact with them in some way if they saw him on sitting there trying not to be noticed. Like they don't really elaborate on why they didn't try and interact with them more. If you saw a gnome just sitting there on the top of a shelf, you'd do something, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you think like, oh, I wonder if it'll talk to me? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I would. Quietly turn around and walk back out the room and close the door and think, what the is that?
Yeah, I
What's
would. I
going
would
on
if
in
I
my
wasn't
kitchen?
used to it. But it sounds like these people are sort of used to the fact that they've got gnomes running around the house, and I just there's no mention of them trying to interact with them or.
How would you interact with a with a gnome? Consider it. Let's pretend it speaks English, or maybe they don't speak. Maybe they don't have a language.
Well, one thing I've just recently listened to an interesting podcast. You know, where Paul Sinclair's Truth Proof. He did one with someone called Joe Hickey Hall about fairies and other things like that, and she says that there's a lot of stories of people sort of getting like a telepathic interaction with them. So maybe that would be you just look at them and you sort of get the message. So
if they were like telepathic and they were sending a message, I would most probably send the message back saying, why do you dress like that? What's the reason to look like you look like? They all kind of are very generic, and they all kind of look the same. You think, well, describe a gnome. Oh, he wears little boots. He's got a little jacket on. He's got like corduroy trousers. He's got a pipe in his mouth, pointy hat, a little beard, and he's always chirpy and off somewhere doing a bit of fishing. That's what they do. I mean, there must be some cases out there where you have evil gnomes. Let's have a look. We got another story here. Let's have a look at this one because it says gnome in the ground. Somebody says, I wish this had happened to me, but it didn't. It happened to my boyfriend of mine. I dated a guy in high school whose family were from Norway. When he was 10-ish, his family all went back to Norway in the summertime to stay on his mother's parents' farm. It was a working farm that was also attached to a large forest. Oh, God, getting gnome vibes already. David was told that he could go anywhere on the farm that he wanted and into the forest up to some degree. They agreed upon the boundary, but no further. So he could go into the forest, but there was a limit. Of course, being 10, he disobeyed and went further into the forest. He was walking along, having found a path, when he heard someone yelling in Norwegian, came to a bend and found what he described as a gnome. The gnome was about the height of a 4-year-old. He was adult, had a full beard, and his clothes looked handmade. There we go. Look, see? I just spoke about that. He had a typical gnome-type hat. The person says, I'm pretty sure that he said it was red, but he could be wrong. I don't know that his suit was light brown or green, pretty much foresty colours. The gnome... Okay, oh, this is a bit... Yeah. So the gnome was screaming at David in Norwegian, shaking his fists. David spoke Norwegian at home, but this form of Norwegian he couldn't really understand, although to him it sounded familiar enough for him to think it was Norwegian. The thing that really had him floored was the gnome was buried up to his knees in a hard dirt path. He wasn't trying to pull himself out. David did not think that he was stuck. David fled the scene, made it safely back to Grandpa's farm. When he got there, he sat on a bench along a wall to catch his breath. His mum saw him and came running and sat beside him. She said to him, you went too far into the woods, didn't you? He could only nod his head. At the time he told me this, his mother had never said another word to him about it, and he never asked her. I kept bugging him to ask her for more, but he never did. I've tried to find him online, blah, 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 but... So, yeah, she's just saying she tried to contact him to find out more information. So, yeah, an angry gnome.
It sounds like the mum must have known that he'd seen... Like, she must have known that there was something out there from that ending.
So, give me a scenario then, Tom. Give me a scenario of what could have possibly happened there.
Well, what you don't get in the story... Well, actually, no, it does sound right, because it was his mother's parents' farm.
Yeah.
So his mother must have grown up there.
Yeah.
So it sounds like she may have also had a similar experience when she was younger. The fact that when they went back, they said, right, you can go this far into the forest, but you can't go further than this boundary. Almost
like she had an encounter or encounters, and then she's kind of like knows that what he experienced. But that's weird. That's weird. It's in the forest. I mean, imagine that. You're in the forest all on your own, having a little walk, and there's a gnome man that's like buried in the ground, just sort of coming out of the ground like a rabbit, and he's having a go at you with his fist, telling you to go away and like a Norwegianish language, which is maybe old Norwegian or something. That's why he couldn't understand it. That's just like... But then again, it was speaking. That's another thing. So they do speak. They do talk.
Yeah.
If he was shouting and stuff. So there's a possibility that some people do hear him speak.
And the way it described him halfway into the ground, or up to his knees in the ground, it sounded like... It made me think of something more like, when you hear ghost stories and they see like a ghost... I've heard stories like where you see a ghost and his torso is sort of halfway through the ground, and they found out like the ground level was a lot lower at the time that this person was alive. It sounded similar to that. Like it doesn't, I mean, it does say he's buried up to his knees, but it sounded more like he was just sort of like stuck in the floor almost, as if he was somehow like not completely solid.
So basically, could the gnome be a manifestation that was not actually living in our realm, but as kind of transposed into this realm?
Yeah.
And is not fully sort of materialized.
Yeah. Sort of slightly in a different dimension where, he's not quite level with the ground in his world, and he's sort of coming through and you can just see him from the knees upwards.
So we could say like a forest spirit.
Yeah. I mean, and also another thing that I noticed was it was about the height of a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And this is something I've noticed with like the other story. It sounded more like they were kind of garden gnome size, like little tiny things. So this is a lot of the encounters that I've read. They're very varied in the height and the size of these things, even though they often look very similar. The way they describe the size of them is always quite varied.
I'm wondering if you had a group of people, you gave them a sheet of paper and a pen, and you put them in separate rooms, and you said, draw what you believe a gnome to be. I think that every single one would be most probably completely different. And that you would get some people drawing the general sort of with the pointy hat with a fishing rod. And you would get other people that would most probably draw gnomes that were evil and, nasty little creatures. Because if you go back to like the 1980s, when you had all the horror films, the slasher films, the rise of videotapes, you had a lot of there were a lot of gnomes in horror films back then, which were all kind of like psychotic and mad and nasty, didn't you?
Yeah.
Possibly some connection there with the way that we perceive them and the way that sort of that we think that how they should be.
So you think if someone else came along and saw the same thing, they might have seen a little sort of a couple of inches high sort of garden gnome type of thing.
They might have seen it completely different.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I'm just guessing, but just reading these stories as everyone sees the similar thing, but as you say, they're all slightly different. We've got another account here, adds more to the phenomenon, because this one is it says thing calling out to me in my mother's voice, need advice as soon as possible. All right, so they say, I live in a small urban neighborhood in a river bend that used to be native land. This is interesting to start with. So we've got some sort of Native American, I suppose, but I suppose sure we'll find out as we go on. The other night I was sitting outside listening to some music, and I heard my mother call my name. I thought I was hearing things since she wasn't home. I had music on. Soon after, I got a really bad feeling and went inside. It was then that I heard my mother's voice calling me on the porch. It sounded exactly like her, but my stomach immediately dropped and I got a terrible feeling. Even the animals were looking at the door. I locked the door and went upstairs, and I heard it from outside again, probably a total of 4 to 5 times. I had a feeling that something was trying to get me to come outside or let it in. A few days ago, we went on vacation, and the neighbour was taking care of our bearded dragon. I suppose that's like a lizard, is it, or something? And she heard her name being called by my mother while in the house. If someone has any advice on what to do, I'd really appreciate it. I think I'm going to bless the house and both the doors. I've heard skinwalkers can do stuff like this, and I'm a bit freaked out. But the thing is, I live in a neighbourhood with houses that have normal-sized yards, and are pretty close together. So would a skinwalker be in a neighbourhood this populated? I have also had issues in the past with spirits in my house. They were never mean, but just pretty active for a while. So, your thoughts, Tom?
I just think that story's really creepy. I've not really looked too much into the skinwalker thing, so I can't really comment on that. What made me interested in the story is that I used to have a similar thing when I was a kid, where I'd be lying there, like listening to music or lying there trying to get to sleep, and I'd suddenly hear my dad's voice as if he'd like shouted at me, like I'd just hear my name, like he'd go, Tom.
Yeah.
And it wasn't him. It was just like a voice, like, you know, it sounded like I would just hear it. And I'm still to this day I'm not convinced it was like a disembodied voice or whether it was in my head or not. Like, you know, because sometimes you listen to music and you hear a strange noise and you sort of lift your headphones to listen. But it just made, like, this is why I was interested in this story, basically, because it kind of reminded me of my own experiences as a child of occasionally just hearing my dad like shouting my name, and it was just like it wasn't him. It was just an odd experience. So yeah,
I've never had people. Well, I have heard people talking before when I've been, you know, had music on or whatever, and I thought, who's that shouting? And I would take the headphones off, and there's nothing. But the thing for me was with this kind of thing, when I used to go to sleep, I would have the feeling that all the pots and pans in the kitchen were suddenly thrown on the floor at once. It was an absolutely deafening sound, and it was, you know, like what they call the exploding head syndrome, and it's the point where you're just falling to sleep, and you're off to sleep, and you're just sort of going into that dream mode. And then it happens, and it happens for quite a while when I was younger, and I got used to it. I sometimes when it first started happening, it was really scary because I didn't know. Well, when it first happened, I remember going downstairs, and I thought like something. All the cupboards that were on the wall, it sounded like all of the cupboards on the wall had all fallen down on the floor. That's what it sounded like, but it wasn't. Obviously, wasn't that. It was the kitchen was fine, but it was, you know, and it was really weird. And also with this story, the name calling, it's almost like you get. Do you know what this likens to? The black-eyed children, the stories of black-eyed children, asking for help and knocking on your door.
Yeah, the fact that it sounds like it wants to be let in, or for them to go outside and see what it is.
It almost goes back to like the vampire, where a vampire will knock on your door and you have to invite it into your home for it to cross the threshold to come in. And if you don't invite it, and it will try to trick you into agreeing that it can come in.
Yeah,
you know. So,
and the fact that the neighbour went into the house and heard the same thing, that's
definitely
confirmation as well.
I mean, I'm just looking. It says here, since you live on native land, could it be a skinwalker? Look it up. So, but I'm just looking to see if anyone else in the comments has had any thoughts that we were just saying. Most people are saying, like, you know, skinwalker. Is it something? I mean, when we talk about skinwalker, we're getting into the realms of the trickster. We're getting into the realms of a phenomenon that is there's multi levels to it. You know, I think that when you think of skinwalker and that kind of trickster, you always go back to Skinwalker Ranch, and Skinwalker Ranch has got a lot of stuff that allegedly happened, but also a lot of stuff that is a little bit ambiguous, where only a small group of people will say what happened, and the information has never really been released. But that's maybe a story for another day. So this story, I mean, as we see this story, it's kind of growing now. The phenomenon is growing, and it's getting more and more like a trickster phenomenon, where people are seeing stuff that is slightly different, but of the same narrative. But it's also able to manifest in a way that it can mimic, because it's using, it's using a kind of a mimic. It's using someone else's voice to get somebody else's attention. For our next story, right, it says, there may be a mimic in our house. like we just talked about with mimics and stuff. It says, not all familiar with the supernatural, if indeed this is what may be dealing with, which is the explanation for what we're leaning towards. So this all started when, so this is the person writing it now. So this all started with my boyfriend was over yesterday. He picked me up from work and I went home for a shower. I was drying off. He opened the door and handed me my underwear. I told him that I appreciate the gesture, but I had underwear in the bathroom already. He also jokingly snapped at me and said, "You called me from downstairs to bring these up." I assumed he was joking, so I took them from him and told him to go back downstairs. Didn't think much of it. Next thing that happened was a couple of hours later. My roommate was getting ready to leave for a date with one of her friends when I heard her calling me from the bedroom to help zip up her dress. I went up to the bedroom to find nobody there. Not only that, but when I saw her leaving the bathroom, she was wearing jeans and a tank top, nothing that I had to zip. I told her that I heard her voice coming from the bedroom. She just looked confused. She went in and looked around. Her TV was off, her computer was off. There was just nothing in her room. The next bit came around 11 p.m. My boyfriend and I had been watching Netflix. I was craving for ice cream, so we drove to get ice cream. After ice cream, we sat and watched an acoustic show for about an hour and a half before heading home. When we got home, we went into the bedroom and I fell asleep watching TV. We woke up around 7 a.m. when he had to leave for work. My roommate was already up and we made a joke that we must have really... Oh, blah, blah, blah. So
she said they were making a lot of noise last night.
When we were alone, discussed what was happening. Initially, the one to draw the strange conclusions based on what was happening. The underwear thing, the dress thing, the shrieking thing. She's a big believer in this kind of stuff, so we seemed open to the fact. A bit of the weirdness came when we were doing our evening meditation, both Wiccans, and we could hear speaking from the hallway. It was between two people. We broke concentration and listened. I considered it was an intruder. Then, as clear as day, through the door we heard night yawl and a high-pitched giggle. Both of those things are with my roommate does, and says that she passes by the room and with the boyfriend at night. So I just want to stop there a minute because they're talking about voices, and once again, it's similar to... I just want to bring something in here because my late co-host Gareth, as you know Gareth, but he told me a story when he went back to his mum's house a long time ago. He would... his brother, he was upstairs and his brother was downstairs, or the other way around, I can't remember. But his brother, he called his brother and his brother came upstairs and said, "What do you want?" I think I'm retelling this, but it's pretty much, this is what happened. And Gareth said, "I didn't call you." And it was almost like someone upstairs was calling him, and it sounded like Gareth calling him to come upstairs, but Gareth didn't call anyone. So this is a very similar thing where the people are, in their home and they're having people call them, and it's like, what's going on there? Once again, it's that kind of paranormal kind of trickster thing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I'd say about this story, because they say roommate, is it possible that they're on, they're hearing people from another flat or something?
Yeah,
that's the only possibility I can think of. Just in that last story, when she hears two voices, I mean, it could be someone else talking in a different room, in a different flat, if they're in some kind of apartment. But when they're hearing voices that sound exactly like the boyfriend hears her calling him from the shower and giving him a specific instruction to bring her some underwear, that's that doesn't sound to me like you're just hearing someone in a different flat or a different apartment.
Well,
that does sound much more like a... I mean, this term, the mimic, I wasn't really aware of that until I started reading these stories. I'd heard of ghosts doing, making voices of living people, but I hadn't heard that term before, the mimic. So
it is kind of like a paranormal thing, and it's not. I wouldn't say it was all that common. I think that when you think of mimicry and stuff like that, you always associate that with the poltergeist phenomenon, because normally when to coin a better word of an infestation, the phenomenon starts to build up. You normally get different levels of the phenomenon. So it usually starts with tapping and rapping, then it will move to kind of coherent noises, things moving around, things disappearing and reappearing, things moving, as in like large objects. And then then not always, but then you'll get like growls and grunts and shouts and stuff. And then it's as if the phenomenon is trying to learn how to talk. And then you start to get vocalizations. And in some cases, you'll get, like we've discussed here, you'll get full-blown, like, people calling you that sounds like your mum or your dad or your brother or your partner or whatever. And it's you'd think it was them, but it's not them. To me, I find that one of the most scary aspects of the phenomenon is that it's able to literally mimic another person to the point where you think it's that person who is calling you. It's quite unsettling.
Yeah, it's very odd.
Yeah, quite unsettling.
I'll tell you a story from when I was a kid. The only time I've heard like a very, apart from apparently, maybe hearing my dad calling me when he wasn't, there was a time where I heard a very clear disembodied voice, and it wasn't like mimicking anyone living that I knew, as far as I know. I was probably around 10, 11, something like that, and we used to go to like a youth club that was in a hall above the church that my parents went to, and there wasn't anyone else in this room. We were just sort of left to our own devices, and it was just me and this other lad in there, and the other kids must have been downstairs doing some activity, but me and this lad were just in this hall on our own, just, I don't know, probably kicking a football around or something. And we just heard, as if someone was stood right next to us, a voice just say something, and I can't remember what it said. It was just something really short, like hello or something like that, but it was as if someone was stood right next to us. And I turned to this guy and I went, like, we both went quiet, and I turned to this guy and I went, did you just hear a voice say whatever it said? And he was like, yes, I did. Like, he was really, you could tell on his face, he was really serious and he was really freaked out. He was like, yeah. And I was like, that was really weird. And then we just we just left the room. But that's the only time and it was so clear, and it was as if someone was stood right next to us, this voice. But it wasn't mimicking anyone that I knew. So it could have just been a disembodied voice of some other sort. But yeah, that's the only time I've ever heard anything.
What was its use?
I don't know if it was a church. Let me just have a look.
I always like to know, to try and find what the building was or what it might have been, with people who'd experienced stuff like that. I always find that part fascinating.
The Rivertown URC Church in Shotton. And I don't know, it must have been built as a church, actually, if you look at it from like the front, because it is on a row of shops. Like, there's a row of shops, and then there's like a church, and it's sort of attached to them. But if you look at the building from the outside, it does look like it was built to be a church of some sort. I don't know. I don't know the history of the building, really. I don't think it's like super ancient. It doesn't look like a really old church. But
did you have nothing else ever happened from in there for you? Just that voice.
Just that one voice, that one time. Yeah,
that's weird. That's just because it's stuff like that. As benign and boring as it as it sounds, it's the creepiest, because it's so. You're in a hall with your friend, kicking a ball around, and then somebody else says something, and there's no one in there. Yeah. It's pretty unsettling, to say the least.
I mean, it's always the mundane stories that are more like the more believable ones anyway. I always find them more interesting, because usually if someone's making up a ghost story or exaggerating, they'll say, oh, I saw a figure and he appeared and said something creepy, but just hearing a little voice next to you and then nothing else after that.
Yeah, that's he appeared and he told me this limerick, and I have to figure it out, but I don't know. It's but just to hear something going hello, it's like that's pretty scary. So as we're reaching the end of this episode, I want to I just want to ask you, we've talked about, primarily we've talked about gnomes and the gnome phenomenon. I know that there's all different, everyone's got their own opinions of what these, where they come from and what they might be. But what do you think this phenomenon, it might be? Is it paranormal, or is it something more than that?
I think it's definitely paranormal, but I don't know what it is. I never like to say, I never like to make a very definite statement on what I think these things are, because I just think you can't really know. But I like the idea that this, especially when the forests are involved, that these places have a sort of an energy of their own, these wild places, and a lot of the time they're like ancient woodlands and things. And I like the idea of there being woodland spirits, and just from walking through these places, you sort of get a sense of you get a feeling of a sort of presence. That's it's not really the same as like when you walk into somewhere like a spooky building and you get the feeling of a presence. It's more like I don't know how to describe it. When I'm walking in the woods, sometimes you just get a feeling of a sort of ancient intelligence of some sort, and I'm kind of drawn to the idea that there's something in that explains these sort of fairy, gnome, goblin type encounters. That it's something to do with this sort of energy that you get in woodlands. I do like a lot of these stories. A lot of them involve forests and things like that, and I like the idea that there's something in the energy of these places that manifests these creatures. But I don't want to say for sure that that's what it is. It's just that's what I'm drawn to.
I kind of know where you're going with that. Recently, I've been reading up and reading some stuff and watching some documentaries on something that has been coined hauntology, and it's the ghost of the past and the ghost of the future. It's the ghost of what we leave behind us, and the way that our cities, our culture, how it changes, and how within the city that you go, you can look around and you can find ghosts of the past. You can find old buildings with old signs on that were something different many years ago, and that they still haunt that area. They still have that presence, and that we give them the energy. And it's the same when you go into ancient woodlands like Epping Forest and places like that had settlements many thousands of years ago. People lived there, and I do think that in some way that those people that had their societies there, and in some way they possibly did imprint on their environment, and that what we're experiencing when we go into those places is we're picking up on something that is now part of the land. It is part of the environment, and you're feeling that kind of past, that the ghosts of the past are kind of you're walking through it. It's because if you think about it, a lot of those ancient sites, encampments. I mean, we've got one here in the woods. Up in the woods, we've got this old. It's a pile of rocks now, but it used to be a Roman fort way back, a couple of thousand years ago, because in this town there was a Roman encampment, and you can go up there. And it's it's free to walk around. It's literally just a pile of rocks now. But even going there, and it's just a pile of rocks, you get a feeling of the past. You get a feeling of there used to be people here. There used to be a community here, a village. That you can feel it. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm a psychic or a medium or anything like that, but I think that everyone has got the ability to tap into that kind of residue of the past, and it's more prevalent in places where I'm not going to say people had a harder life, but they were more emotionally focused and in touch with the land. They lived, let's be honest, lots of people in the olden days were more connected with the land than we are now.
Yeah,
they lived, they worked the land, they lived off the land. And, that's what kept them alive. They were farmers or whatever, but they were more in touch with their environment than we are today. We've become very detached with our environment. And so I think when we go around to like cities like London and where you are, and you look at the places from 200-300 years ago, which are still around now, but maybe have got different usages, you know, you look at what they are and you can feel those old alleyways and roads, and you can pick up on that ghost of the past. I don't know, maybe, but I found all that really fascinating. I really do.
I mean, I've heard that as a criticism of modern architecture, is there's just no sense of it having any place in time, because it's just sort of built to, you know, it's not built of these old buildings, just big stone structures, and they just feel sort of like they've got a place, whereas the modern architecture is just these sort of glass steel things that, you know, they feel like they're sort of temporary almost, and there's sort of a sense that we don't. It's almost like we're sort of, with the modern cities, it's almost like we're just designed to live in the present forever, and we're not connected to the past in any way, because with all these sort of modern structures, it's almost like we've just tarmacked over the past completely. We're just not connected with it in any way. If you want to get into conspiracy theories, you could say that it's done deliberately so that we don't have any connection to our past.
Well, you know, I do think that when you look at some of the buildings and some of the architecture from 500 years ago, and you look at it and you think, wow, that's got real character. But I mean, the character comes from its usage and from the people that dwelled in it. But you also have the architecture of the late 60s, early 70s, I think what they coined that, like brutalism, where we had these real stark buildings with straight lines. And some of that, I got to say, some of that architecture I really like. I really like it.
Yeah. I know brutalism gets a lot of stick these days, but I am quite a fan of some of it. Some of it just looks like it's designed to demoralize us, to be honest.
Yeah, grey.
Like it's just a big grey block of nothing. But some of it's really it's interesting to look at. I find it
There are good, many. Unfortunately, even those kind of buildings are disappearing now. As you say, they're being demolished. I mean, obviously, you know, you've got you've got that kind of architecture, and then you go to the extreme where you have the tower blocks, and people were, you know, and a lot of those are gone now. But as I say, and it's kind of like the modern architecture we've got now, there isn't a lot of character to it. It's kind of there to serve a purpose, and it doesn't really have any character. And I think that you know, in a way, I always like to go to places when you look around, you think, wow, there's a lot of character here, but we are losing it, I think, and a lot of those buildings are being brushed away, and for whatever reason, maybe there is a master plan. Maybe they do want to completely detach us from our past. Maybe.
I mean, I'm not too conspiracy minded, but I've heard some theories that's why modern buildings are designed the way they are. It's just to sort of, because you think any city in the world, they all kind of look very similar nowadays, whereas in the past, we all had like a sense of place and a sense of who we were from, you know, our surroundings, whereas nowadays we're kind of all just, it's all a bit homogenous.
Well, it is. I mean, you could drop yourself into any major city, modern, you know, it has been modernized in the whole of the country, and you would most probably not be too sure where you were. Because it all looks the same, but back then, even different cities had, you know, different styles of architecture, because they offered different things. They had different, you know, the products they produced were different. You would have Bristol, which was a harbour port, so all of the buildings you'd have like taverns and stuff, and then you'd have, you know, in London it was more industrial, so you had more factories and buildings. Up north you had more the bigger sort of, you know, industrial ironworks and stuff. So everywhere was slightly different, but everywhere had a character. You say all that's been kind of, over the years, it's been kind of swept away, and everything's very same now. And whether that's part of a master plan, I don't think we'll ever know, to be honest. I don't know how
it's part of a master plan to make the gnomes go away.
It's a gnome master plan. That's what. There you go. We've solved it. The gnomes are here to get rid of our architecture. They're going to get rid of our architecture. There you go. But anyway, that was an interesting conversation, Tom. I think we've come to the end of this episode. I mean, we could go on for hours, but we've got to sort of we've got to set a limit because we'll be here forever otherwise. Very interesting. I think that the gnomes are. I think we've come away with one thing from this episode is that gnomes are scary.
Yeah, I'd probably poop my pants if I saw one. I think.
Yeah. So
I wouldn't.
Exactly. If you see a gnome, go the other way.
I mean, I'd like to see one just out of interest, but I think I would probably need to change the trousers afterwards.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there are a few videos online with gnomes walking around, and you think to yourself, are they real or are they made up? Who knows? But it's still a bit creepy. So, have you got any new working on any new videos?
Yes, I've got one that's nearly done. It's about strange torture methods, so that should be a lot of fun.
Lovely.
Yeah, and I have been also thinking about doing one about famous gnome sightings as well.
Oh,
just because I'm interested in the subject at the minute. So
it is a bit weird.
There might be one coming out.
Yeah, that's cool.
Sometime soon.
Well, I know that you'll be back soon because we're arranging to do a live stream of spooky ghost videos. So everyone's gonna have to keep their eyes peeled for that. That'll be an interesting one. I think we're gonna do like a top 10 of sort of creepy videos and sort of review them on a live stream. That'll be kind of fun. That'll be fun to do, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, so thanks everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's a bit of a freewheeling episode, but I kind of like that with Tom because you never know where the conversation's going to go. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Always good. And until next episode, talk to you soon.